The night outside the small hospital was unusually still. A dense fog had rolled in, so thick that it seemed to blur the edges of reality. Meera, sitting by her father's bedside, stared out the cracked window, watching the soft glow of the village lights barely flicker through the mist. It was a quiet night, and yet in this room, the weight of existence seemed to press down on her. She looked over at her father, Ravi, who lay frail and weak in the hospital bed. His breaths were shallow, each one a struggle. She hadn't left his side in days, unwilling to let go, unable to imagine life without him. The air in the room was thick with the smell of incense, mingled with the mustiness of old stone walls. The hospital was humble, a simple building in this remote village in India, far from the bustling cities. The wood-paneled walls creaked with every gust of wind, and the sounds of distant temple bells seemed to echo through the halls. Outside, the call of an owl pierced the stillness. Meera's hand rested on her father's, her fingers lightly tracing the veins on his frail skin. He had always been a strong man, a pillar in her life, and yet here he was, at the edge of something she couldn't fully comprehend, at the boundary between life and whatever comes next. "Papa?" Meera whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness. "Are you in pain?" Ravi opened his eyes slowly, his once sharp gaze now clouded with age and exhaustion. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "No, beta, no pain," he murmured. "Just tired." Meera's heart clenched. She wanted to say something comforting, something profound, but the words wouldn't come. All she could think of was how unfair this was, how unfair it was to lose him when she still had so many questions, so much left unsaid. "You've always been strong, Papa," she said softly, her voice trembling. I don't know if I'm ready to face the world without you." Ravi's smile widened slightly, though his eyes remained closed. "Ah, Meera, strength comes in many forms. You will find it, even when you think you can't." They sat in silence for a long moment, the sound of his shallow breaths filling the room. Meera's thoughts raced, as they had been for days. She had always believed herself to be rational and practical. But now, the face of her father's impending death, nothing seemed to make sense. The world felt fragile, and as if it could shatter at any moment. "But how do you know, Papa?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. How do you know I'll be okay?" Ravi's eyes fluttered open, and he gazed at her with a depth of understanding that she couldn't quite fathom yet. "Because you're not just this body, Meera. None of us are." Meera frowned, leaning in closer to him to hear him better. What do you mean?" Ravi sighed softly, his breath shallow but steady. We are something far greater than these bodies, these minds. We are part of something much larger, something eternal. The body may wither, but the soul, the Atman, goes on forever. Meera blinked back some tears. She had heard these words before, of course. They were part of the teachings of her culture, her religion. But now, as her father lay on his deathbed, the words took on new weight, a new meaning. "You've always been so wise, Papa," she said, her voice breaking. But I'm scared. I don't know if I can do this." Ravi's hand, though weak, squeezed hers gently. "You're stronger than you know, Beta, and you're not alone. You never will be." The room fell into a heavy silence once more, broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional distant sound of chanting from the nearby temple. Meera's mind was spinning, filled with questions she wasn't sure she wanted the answers to. She had always thought of her life as a series of events, a progression from birth to death, with love and loss in between. But now, as she sat by her father's side, she began to wonder if there was more. If perhaps this life, this world, wasn't as real as it seemed. "Papa," she said softly, Do you think this world is real?" Ravi chuckled, though the sound was faint, like a breeze rustling through dry leaves. "Ah, Meera, that's the great question, isn't it? What is real?" Meera frowned. "But, of course it's real. We're here, aren't we?" Her father's smile widened, and for a moment, Meera saw a glimmer of the man he had once been. The man who had always challenged her to think beyond the obvious, to question everything. "We are here," he agreed. "But what does that really mean?" Meera shook her head, confused. I don't understand." Ravi's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. "Think of it this way, Beta. You've had dreams before, haven't you? Dreams that felt so real, so vivid, that you were sure they were real until you woke up." Meera nodded slowly, her mind racing to keep up with her father's words. "And when you wake up," Ravi continued, "you realize that the dream was just that, a dream. But while you were in it, it felt real, didn't it?" Ravi's smile softened. "Is it?" Meera's breath caught in her throat. She had never thought of life that way before, as something that could be both real and unreal at the same time. But now, as her father lay before her, so close to crossing over into whatever came next, she began to wonder if perhaps he was right. What are you saying, Papa?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Ravi's eyes drifted closed again, and for a moment, Meera thought he had fallen asleep. But then he spoke, his voice so soft that she had to lean in to hear him. I'm saying that this world, this life, is not all there is. It is just one layer, one part of a much larger reality. We come here to learn, to grow, to experience. But it is not the end. It is not the whole truth. Meera's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what to say. The idea that life was just a fleeting moment, a part of something much larger, was both terrifying and comforting at the same time. But if this isn't real, she whispered, then what is? Ravi's eyes opened once more, and he gazed at her with a depth of love and understanding that made her heart ache. Why, love, Beta. Love is real. Everything else is just part of the play. Meera's eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away quickly, not wanting to show her father how much his words were affecting her. But he saw through her, as he always did. It's okay to cry, he said softly. Even in the grand play, the emotions we feel are real. They are part of the experience. Meera nodded, unable to speak. She thought of all the times she had cried in her life, over small things, like the toy she had lost as a child, and over big things, like the heartbreak she had endured as an adult. And now, here she was, crying over the impending loss of the man who had been her guide, her father. I remember that toy, Ravi said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. You were so devastated when you lost it. But now, looking back, you see, it wasn't so important, was it? Meera laughed through her tears. No, Papa, it wasn't. Ravi smiled, his eyes twinkling with the same knowing look. That's how life is. The things we think are so important in the moment, they fade. But the lessons we learn from them, those stay with us. Meera leaned in closer, resting her head gently on his chest, listening to the faint rhythm of his heartbeat. She knew it wouldn't be long now. She knew that soon he would be gone, and all that would be left would be the memories, the lessons, and the love he had given her. You've taught me so much, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But how do I go on without you? The silence in the room was thick, like the air before a storm. Meera could feel the weight of her father's words, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to accept them. Everything she had known her whole life, everything she had worked for, hoped for, suddenly seemed small and inconsequential. How could it be that this world wasn't the only reality? How could it be that the pain she was feeling wasn't as real as it seemed? Her father's breathing had grown shallower, but his gaze remained steady. He had always been like that, calm, collected, even in the face of the unknown. It was one of the things she'd admired most about him. "You know, Beta," Ravi said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "There's something I've learned over the years. Something I didn't fully understand until now." Meera leaned in closer, her heart pounding. What is it, Papa?" Ravi closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. When he spoke again, his voice was even softer, as if he were speaking not just to her, but to the universe itself. "Life is a game," he said, "a game that we all play, whether we realize it or not. We get so caught up in the rules, the roles we're assigned, the victories and the losses. But in the end, it's all just a play." "Lila." Meera frowned. "Lila?" Ravi smiled faintly. "Why, yes, Beta. It's a concept from our ancient teachings. Lila means divine play. The universe itself is a game, a cosmic drama that we are all actors in. We take on these roles: father, daughter, friend, lover, and we play them as if they are all that matters. But in the end, we return to the source, to who we truly are. We are not those roles, those bodies. We are the observers, the witness of it all." Meera sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. She had heard about Lila before, of course, in stories and lessons, but she had never really thought about it in this way before. If life was just a play, a game, then what did that mean for her, for her father, for the people she loved? "But if it's all just a play," she said softly, "then what's the point? Why do we go through all this suffering and all of this pain?" Ravi's eyes twinkled, and for a moment, Meera could see the mischievous glint in his gaze. The same glint he had when he was younger, when he would tell her stories of Davis and heroes of old, the battles and victories that seemed larger than life. "Ah, Beta," he said softly, "that's the greatest mystery, isn't it? Why do we play the game? Why do we put ourselves through the trials and tribulations of life? It's because, through the game, we learn, we grow, and we evolve." Meera's heart ached as she listened to her father speak. She had always known him to be wise, but now, as he lay on the edge of life and death, his words seemed to carry even more weight, even more truth. "So you're saying all the pain, all the suffering, it's all part of the game?" Ravi nodded slowly. "Yes, and it's not just a game for us, Beta. It's a game for the gods too. They watch us, they guide us, but they also let us make our own choices, our own mistakes. They let us feel the pain, the joy, the sorrow, because through it all, we learn what it means to be human. We learn what it means to love, to lose, to grow. Meera's eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away quickly. But Papa, if this is all just a game, then what happens when it ends? What happens when you're gone? Ravi's smile softened, and he reached out to gently touch her cheek. When the game ends, we return to the source. We become one with everything, with the universe, with the divine. And in that moment, we realize that everything we went through, everything we experienced, was perfect. Every joy, every sorrow, every triumph, every loss, it was all exactly as it was meant to be. Meera's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to find comfort in his words. But the fear of losing him, the fear of being left behind, was too much to bear. But what about me, Papa? She whispered. What happens to me when you're gone? Ravi's gaze was steady, filled with a depth of love that made her heart ache. You will go on, Beta. You will continue to play your role, to live your life. And one day, when your time comes, you will return to the source. And in that moment, you will understand everything. Meera's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to make sense of the emotions swirling inside of her. She wanted to scream, to cry, to hold on to her father and never let go. But deep down, she knew that he was right. Papa, she said softly, her voice trembling. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I'm ready to say goodbye. Ravi's hand squeezed hers gently. You don't have to say goodbye, Beta. I will always be with you, in your heart, in your memories, and in the lessons I've taught you. And when you look up at the stars at night, when you feel the breeze on your face, you will know I am there. Meera's tears flowed freely now, and she didn't try to stop them. She leaned in, resting her head on her father's chest, listening to the faint rhythm of his heartbeat. She knew that it wouldn't be long now. She knew that soon he would be gone, and all that would be left would be the memories, the love, and the lessons he had imparted. For a long time, they sat in silence. The only sound, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, and the distant call of the temple bells. Meera's mind raced, filled with questions, fears, and regrets. She thought of all the times she had taken her father for granted, all the moments she had let slip by without truly appreciating them. I wish I had more time, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ravi's eyes fluttered open, and he gazed at her with a soft smile. Time is an illusion, Beta. We always think we need more of it, but in the end, we have all the time we need. Meera frowned, not fully understanding his words. But I don't understand. How can time be an illusion? It's all we have. Ravi's smile widened, and he reached out to gently touch her cheek. Ah, Beta, time is just another part of the game. It all seems real. It seems linear. But in truth, it's just a construct. We are eternal. We exist beyond time. Meera's mind spun, trying to grasp the meaning of her father's words. She had always thought of time as something fixed, something that marched forward relentlessly, taking her closer to the inevitable end. But now, as her father spoke, she began to wonder if perhaps time wasn't as real as she had always believed. Then, if time isn't real, she said slowly, well, what is? Ravi's eyes twinkled with a knowing smile. Love, Beta. Love is real. It's the only thing that transcends time, that transcends the game. Everything else is just part of the play. Meera's heart ached as she listened to her father's words. She had always believed in love, of course, but now, as he lay on his deathbed, the meaning of that word seemed to shift, to deepen. Love? She whispered, her voice barely audible. But what does that mean? How can love be the only thing that's real? Ravi's smile softened, and he gazed at her with a depth of understanding that made her heart ache. Love is the force that binds all of us together, Beta. It's the thread that weaves through the fabric of the universe, connecting everything, everyone. It's the reason we play the game, to learn what it means to love, to be loved, and to give love. Meera's tears flowed freely now, and she didn't try to stop them. She had always known that her father was wise, but now, in his final moments, his words seemed to carry even more weight, even more truth. Meera sat quietly, her father's words echoing in her mind. The idea that love was the only thing that transcended time, that it was the only thing that was truly real, was both comforting and unsettling. She thought back to all the moments in her life when love had seemed so simple, so fleeting. But now, in this moment, with her father slipping away, she realized that love was far more profound than she had ever understood. I wish I could hold on to this moment forever, she whispered, her voice trembling. Ravi smiled gently, his hand resting on hers. You don't need to hold on to it, Beta. Moments like this, they never truly fade. They stay with you, in your heart. And even when I'm gone, I will still be with you. Always. Meera's tears flowed even more freely now, and she didn't try to stop them. She had spent so much of her life trying to control her emotions, trying to keep everything together. But now, in the face of losing her father, she realized that it was okay to let go, to feel the depth of her grief. "Papa," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. I don't know how to say goodbye." Ravi's smile softened again, and he gazed at her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "You don't have to say goodbye, Beta. Goodbye is just another part of the illusion. I will always be with you, in the memories we've shared, in the lessons I've taught you, and in the love we've given each other." Meera nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. She didn't know how to imagine a life without her father, without his wisdom, his guidance, and his love. But deep down, she knew that he was right. He would always be with her, in some way. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Meera closed her eyes, letting the quietness wash over her. She thought back to her childhood, to times when her father had carried her on his shoulders, when he had taught her how to ride a bicycle, when he had comforted her after her first heartbreak. Every moment was filled with love, with a sense of safety and belonging that she knew she would carry with her for the rest of her life. "Do you remember, Beta?" Ravi said suddenly, his voice barely audible. "That little toy you lost when you were a child." Meera's eyes flew open, startled by the sudden shift in the conversation. "Well, what toy, Papa?" Ravi smiled faintly, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "You know, the little wooden elephant. You were so devastated when you lost it. You thought the world was ending." Meera blinked, surprised that he would bring up something so trivial at a time like this. She hadn't thought about that toy in years. I remember," she said softly. I was so upset. I thought I would never find it again." Ravi's smile widened. "And yet you did. Do you remember where you found it?" Meera frowned, trying to recall the details. I think I found it in the garden, buried under the flowers. But I don't remember how it got there." Ravi chuckled softly, though the sound was faint, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. "Ah, Beta, that's the beauty of life. Sometimes the things we think we've lost forever, they find their way back to us. And sometimes the things we think are important turn out to be just a small part of a much larger story." Meera stared at him, her heart pounding. There was something about the way he said it, something that made her feel as though he was talking about more than just a toy. It was as if he was trying to tell her something important, but she couldn't quite grasp what it was. Papa? She whispered, her voice trembling. What are you trying to say? Ravi's eyes fluttered closed, and for a moment, Meera thought he had fallen asleep. But then he spoke, his voice so soft, she had to lean in to hear him. I'm saying, Beta, he murmured, that life is full of surprises. Sometimes, the things we think are lost are just waiting for the right moment to return. And sometimes, the things we think are real are just shadows of something much greater. Meera's heart ached as she listened to his words. She wanted to understand. She wanted to grasp the deeper meaning behind what he was saying. But the emotions swirling inside her made it hard to think clearly. They sat in silence again, the moments stretching out into what felt like eternity. Meera's mind was spinning, filled with questions, fears, and a deep sense of loss. She thought of all the times she had taken her father for granted, all the moments she had let slip by without truly appreciating them. I wish I could have done more, she whispered. I wish I could have been a better daughter. Ravi's hand squeezed hers gently, and he opened his eyes to gaze at her with a depth of love and understanding that only a father knows. You've been everything I could have ever hoped for, Beta. You've brought me so much joy, so much love. Never doubt that. As Meera watched her father's chest rise and fall with shallow breaths, she knew the moment was near. The words they had exchanged echoed in her mind like the soft tolling of the temple bell outside. She closed her eyes, trying to hold on to the sound of his voice, the warmth of his presence. But even as she tried to cling to the present, she felt it slipping away. Hours later, when the room was quiet and Ravi had breathed his last, Meera sat by his bedside, numb with grief. The nurses came and went, their soft whispers blending into the background as they covered her father's body. The doctor spoke to her in hushed tones, but Meera barely registered his words. Her mind was elsewhere, caught between the reality of her father's passing and the surreal understanding that he was no longer a part of this world. 2 weeks later, Meera sat alone in her small home, sifting through the letters and condolences that had piled up. Her heart still ached, and though the days had passed, the pain felt just as sharp as it had. As she flipped through the stack of envelopes, her eyes fell on a small package wrapped in brown paper. Her name was scrawled across the front in a familiar hand. Curious, she carefully unwrapped the package, her heart racing with anticipation. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a small wooden elephant. The very same toy she had lost as a child. Meera's breath caught in her throat as she held it in her hands, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the wood. There was a note tucked beneath the toy, written in her father's handwriting. With trembling hands, Meera unfolded the paper and read the words. Sometimes the things we think we've lost are just waiting for the right moment to return. Love, Papa. Good night and namaste.